Welcome back to another episode of Staff Duty. I'm your host, Bree, and this is the Veteran Podcast where we discuss our time in, our time out, and everything in between. So, if you've been in the Army any amount of time, then you know that if the Army is even thinking about something, it does not take long for us to catch on. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to form opinions around it. And that's just what it is. So earlier this year, the Army decided that was thinking about and considering going back to the APFT. And it spread like wildfire. And there were veterans that were, I know y'all were at the gym. Y'all were doing those push-ups, those sit-ups. Y'all were giddying up, okay, getting ready for that run. I know you, because I know I did it too, okay? And so it doesn't take long. So here I am on staff duty. And this is like me returning. So it's like later in the shift. You know, when you finish work and then you have to work in the evenings. And so I'm sitting on staff duty and I am with my NCO and my runner, and we're just talking about it. And they're telling me, like, hey, I kind of like the ACFT. I feel like the APFT would be easier. And I'm thinking to myself, I kind of like the ACFT. And I liked it because when I first came in the Army, I liked the APFT, because the APFT was easy. So if you're not familiar, the Army physical fitness test was a test where all you had to do was push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. And then the Army changed and said, now we want you to do the Army combat fitness test, and there are 6 categories of fitness that the Army is going to test you on. So that's the backdrop. And I like the original one because if you could do those things, you felt like you were in shape, you could just whiz through it and move on. If you were a good runner, you could whiz through the test and move on. Now I prefer the Army Combat Fitness Test because it involves a different level of strength. It involves time. It involves technique. You actually have to learn. You have to prepare for the test. And I personally feel like I got more out of my fitness, and my fitness changed overall, even outside of the Army, from having to learn other exercises and really strength train at the gym. So that was my take. So I just told them, we're talking about it. And of course, in classic staff duty fashion, another NCO comes up, and she's like managing some of the soldiers that are on additional duty or extra duty. And she's like, well, you guys are talking about that. Have you heard that the Army is actually thinking about allowing people to enlist without having a GED or a high school diploma, as long as you pass the ASVAB? And of course, like, that didn't really come through like the officer channels of like, oh, Army's thinking about this, Army's thinking about that. So I was pretty new to hearing about that, and I didn't know. And so my soldiers are talking about it, and they're kind of like going back and forth with like, I don't think you should be able to be allowed in. I don't think you should be able to do these things. And of course, they're like, well, what do you think about it? And so I'm like, well, what do I think about it? I think it's time for us to time travel. All right, so here we are. And it's 2015, and I'm gearing up to enlist. I've gone to the recruiting office down in PG County. If you guys have ever been or lived in Maryland, there's the PG County Mall. And I go into the recruiting station down by the PG County or mall in Maryland. And I look around, I'm looking at every office. First, you know where I headed, the Air Force. So I go in the Air Force office, and the recruiters are acting like they don't have any time for me. And they're like, we don't have time to ship you off right away. We don't have time. So I said, okay. And so I checked out the Marines. I was like, maybe I could be tough. Yeah, no, I'm good. And so I went past the Army recruiting office, and, everybody was pretty friendly. So I'm like, good vibes so far. I had done a little research online. I had found out that if I came in through the Army, I would be able to come in at the highest rank out of all the branches for that kind of grade, which was E4 as a specialist. So I was like, okay, so this has the highest kind of pay bracket that I could come in at. So I was like, maybe this is for me. And I talked to the recruiter, and they say, well, let's just start you out, because regardless of where you go, you have to take an ASVAB. So let's just start you out with a practice test. So I take the practice test. Now, I got a 46, and the recruiters tell me, you got this 46, and to be honest, this is not passing. Like, this is not good. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. And so then I'm like, well, this is low. So what am I going to do? So the recruiter is like, well, just go home, practice, study, and get ready, and you can take it again. You can take this practice test as many times as you need. So that's what I do. I go home, I try to do some practice tests. I try to do some ASVAB, like studying some books. And I'm praying. I'm like, God, please. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Help me. Now, pause. If I had to do it over again, or if you're thinking about taking the ASVAB and joining and being a part of the Army, what I would say now is to go to your local library, borrow some books. You can even download the Libby app, Libby, and that is the library app. And you can get your e-ASVAB books. So if you want to just read and scroll on your phone and go through it, you can go through it and borrow those books from the digital library. And I will also say one very common thing that almost any kind of branch or specialty does, whether you're studying for law, whether you're studying for a medical test, whether you're studying for dental, ASVAB, project management certifications, you can go online and you can take the practice test. So I would say take an hour or two on a Friday or a Saturday, and just, if you can, because I know I struggle to concentrate for long periods of time, but if you can, just sit there, hone in for just a short amount of time, maybe, like I said, hour or two, and just click on every single link and take all of those practice tests. Because when you go back into the office or go back into where they're facilitating the ASVAB, you'll be acquainted with the formatting, you'll be acquainted with the time limits, you'll be acquainted with the kinds of questions they may ask, and it should help you. So that's what I would say to do. And so, play. So I've done these practice tests, and the second time that I do this practice test, I get a 64. So it's passing. And it was crazy because I had went home, I prayed, I'm like, God help me. I had read, studied all these things, and it went from a 46 to a 64. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's progress. Now, I am back at my recruiter. They're like, all right, I think you may be ready for the actual ASVAB. And so I'm like, okay, great. Where do I go? Since I'm ready, my recruiter looks at me and says, "Go home." Go home? I need to take my ASVAB. They say, "Go home. I'll send you a link and you can take your ASVAB from home. The Army has this program, you can take your ASVAB from home." So I go home and I'm sitting on like this back patio of my room and I say, "God, I'm not going to cheat on this test, even though obviously I can. I'm not going to cheat on this test. Help me to take this test. I'm going to take this test to see how well I do the first time around." And I had also done the research and I found out, because sometimes you have to, kind of like a camera lens, you have to be able to zoom into what you currently want and then also zoom out to that future you. What is it that you want in the future? In the future for me, I wanted to be an Army officer. So when I took my ASVAB test, my zooming out moment to see what was off in the distance was I needed a 110 on this ASVAB here and now so that I wouldn't have to retake it in the future when it came time for me to submit my packet. So I'm praying. I'm like, "God, help me on this test, but I'm not going to cheat because I'm taking my ASVAB at home. And let's just see how well I do." Well, I passed. I think I got like around an 80. And I remember for sure my GT score was a 117. And so I had passed. Thank God I had passed. And so now we're going to go back. I'm on staff duty. And my soldier is like, "What do you think about people being able to enlist without a GED or a high school diploma, but able to pass the ASVAB?" So I tell my soldier, "I know it's really difficult to imagine, but there are some people out here that do not come from the same kinds of opportunities that you have. And all they need is for someone to take a chance on them. And it's hard to imagine the kind of mud that some people have to get it out of." Now, because, I just be thinking about stuff at home, y'all. Like, I just, my little mind be like, "You know what? I remember that conversation. Now I know what I would say to that." And so, that's what I told them in the moment. But then looking back on it, it's like, I had a high school diploma. I had a bachelor's degree. And y'all, I did not pass that practice ASVAB the first time. I didn't. And so I didn't pass it. And it's not as though the Army is saying there's no requirement at all. There's still a requirement. You still have to take a test. You still have to take the ASVAB. But yeah. And thinking on it some more, the other thing is, I don't think the enemy is going to ask about your credentials in a battlefield situation. I don't think they're going to ask about your credentials. But yeah, so that's kind of what I thought about it. And there's one other thing that I also want to say. And let me know, because I know some of y'all came in around 2015. And if you came in around 2015, let me know. Did you take your ASVAB at home? Because I know I couldn't have been the only one who took mine online at home. Like, do y'all remember that? And when I think about it, it's like, I've been in now for almost 8 years. Nobody has ever asked me, did I take my ASVAB at home? Nobody's ever asked me that, y'all. No one has ever asked me, do you have a GED? I know you're an officer, but did you get your GED? Did you get your high school diploma? What's your degree in? No, unless maybe somebody might ask me what my degree is in. But no one has asked me, did I get a high school diploma? Even when I was a specialist, no one asked me, do you have a high school diploma? Nobody asked me, um, do you have a GED or a high school diploma? You know? So I don't know. That's just my take on it. And also, I just want to take a moment. We're going to take another pause. But I just want to get on here and I want to say, and I'm not going to say I'm preaching, but I just want to preach real quick. Because sometimes all it takes is for you to be available. Sometimes you just have to say, God, I'm going to be available for this thing. I'm going to do my part. You know, sometimes you just have to show up and leave the rest in God's hands. Because once again, I took my ASVAB at home. And I know sometimes things can be like scary. Taking tests, taking opportunities, putting yourself out there, out of your comfort zone, deciding you're going to get it out the mud. Sometimes it's scary. But it just takes one baby step sometimes. That's all it takes. And opportunity will open up to you. Play. Yeah, so no leader has ever asked me, about that kind of stuff. And the Army has had some of the most interesting programs. Like, I remember I had an NCO when I was in AIT, and he told us, he said, yeah, y'all, it was either jail or serve. Like, the Army had plenty of programs that were like, and unless you talk to someone and you ask them their story, how'd you get in, how'd you get out, everything in between, unless you ask somebody their story, you probably aren't going to know those things about that veteran, that person serving. You probably aren't going to know it was jail or serve, or this person is homeschooled and now they're in the Army or in a military branch of service. But yeah, no leader has ever asked me that. And if you like learning, I want to share that there's Harvard offers, through their Harvard Business School, they offer online courses. They actually have a course on writing and rhetoric. And so I think too that some things come into play because somebody talks about it online. This is a program that armies think about. And then people are able to form their public opinions on that thing. But honestly, you would never know. Unless somebody actually puts the conversation out there through an article, you will never know. And some of this information you can find on Military Times. But you would never know how people are coming in. And 8 years later, coming in as a specialist who initially failed the ASVAB practice tests, now being on this side of the house, first being enlisted, now being an officer, 8 years in, a few degrees later, you would never know unless I decide, hey, I'm going to tell you guys my story. You just would never know. So anyway, enough about that. What I believe when it comes to this. Some people just need an opportunity, and they just need an opportunity to get it out the mud. So this is what I think about it. I'll never know when you become a vet your story until you decide to tell me how you got in, how you got out, and everything in between. And if I find myself in a combat zone, I just want you to have my six. And I want us to be able to bring America's sons and daughters back home, alive, safe. So that's my take on it. Now, if you like to read or if you're interested in kind of learning, like I said, Harvard Business School has online courses. They got some really cool courses that if you want, you can take. I've taken a few. They've been really helpful. I've learned some things. Also, I have 6 books that I want to share. 2 of those books which were brought to film. So if you like these kinds of things, Netflix has 2 shows. One is Hillbilly Elegy and the other one is Made. Hillbilly Elegy is by J.D. Vance, and Made is a book that was brought to film as well, and that is by Stephanie Land. She recently released her second book called Class. And then I have these books here. Educated. This book impacted me tremendously. I read this as a second lieutenant, brand new in the Army. It was recommended by a leader. This is a memoir by Tara Westover. She is a woman who grew up to survivalist parents in Idaho. Her parents pulled her from school and she began to teach herself. So she just started reading and teaching herself. As she did that, she ended up going to, I believe it was Cambridge, and also, yes, Cambridge and also Harvard University. And she ends up releasing this memoir about her family and then also about how her teaching herself landed her amazing places. So sometimes all people need is an opportunity. This one is Hood Feminism. It talks about some of the things that Mickey Kendall has had to overcome. Mickey Kendall is also a veteran and she served in the Army. Hood Feminism. Sometimes all people need is an opportunity. But yeah, she came from the hood, was a veteran, served for a few years, and then now is a well-recognized author. But she just needed an opportunity. David Goggins, we're all familiar with him. He has 2 books. This is his second book, Never Finished. He was he is or was a Navy SEAL, has done amazing things. But once again, if you're familiar with David Goggins, you know he had to get it out the mud. Okay? But sometimes people just need a what? An opportunity. And I want to say his first book is called Can't Hurt Me. And final book. This is by Condoleezza Rice called Extraordinary Ordinary People. This is about her upbringing, about her father, as you can see, picture with her parents. And her dad was huge on education. And once again, sometimes all people need is an opportunity. And then she was also went on to be Secretary of State as well, Condoleezza Rice. So that's what I have for this podcast episode. And I want to know, give me your thoughts. How do you feel? Tell me about any programs that you remember the Army releasing. It's kind of funny because I was thinking maybe it would be nice to have like almost like pop culture, like some type of like pop culture Army edition. But tell me, did you take your ASVAB at home? Did you Were you a part of the jailer serve time frame? Like, what programs do you remember in the Army that were peculiar? Do you feel like you should have a GED and you're not changing on that stance? Do you feel like you should have a high school diploma and you're not changing on that stance? Or do you feel like ASVAB is good enough? What are your thoughts? And also, how did you plan when it came to preparing to take your ASVAB? Drop your study tips in the comments. So again, thank you, Battle Buddy, for showing up 10 minutes early to staff duty because I'm ready to go home. Till next time.